Marie.
Hello, Youssou. Nice to see you.
Nice
Comment
to see you
ça va?
too. Ça va bien, Marie. Ça va.
Très bien, très bien. C'est un grand plaisir, vraiment.
Oui, merci.
Wonderful to see you. Hello,
Je pense qu'on a
Youssou.
Nice to see you.
Hello, Youssou. How are you, Youssou? Bonjour, Youssou. C'est Alice ici. Comment ça va?
My sister, how are you?
My sister, how are you? My brother, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.
Vous êtes le très bienvenu, Youssou. Géraldine ici à New York. Donc, avec votre arrivée maintenant, nous sommes prêts à commencer. So I think we're ready to start, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted to say a big welcome and good morning to you. We're well over 100 participants already and rising for what is a very special meeting and a really important event. I'm proud to be joined by my colleagues, Ambassador Kamaya of Liberia and by Ambassador Penelope Beckles of Trinidad and Tobago, who are co-hosting with me this morning. Before we start, I just one housekeeping point to make is that we keep speakers, of course, on mute as the panelists give us some of their wisdom. And just to underline that at the end, we hope to have 30 or 40 minutes where we will open the floor, and depending on our capacity, we can take groups of questions. We'll ask you to be rather concrete and focused in helping us to develop our thoughts here, because we do want to have an outcome to this discussion this morning. And that sets what we're doing this morning apart from most of these kind of events that we've seen in recent weeks in these extraordinary circumstances. So extraordinary, of course, because of COVID, something that's impacting clearly our lives in every sphere, from our private to economic, social, political lives. But today is really, I think, about recognizing that there is enormous impact on education, and that impact has been particularly severe right across the globe. We know schools are shut in just about every country worldwide, and about 1.5 billion, a figure that's almost hard to comprehend, 1.5 billion students now we know have had their education disrupted in one manner or another. And that includes, we estimate, about 734 million girls. The truth is that this is a pandemic that's happening to girls and adolescent girls in this sense, on top of an already existing crisis. So for many, school disruption is new, but for many girls, and we know 130 million girls are out of education, this is one crisis on top of another. As we know, even for the girls who get to school, they're not always learning. And so what I'm trying to say in a rather roundabout way is that this COVID crisis is not a new reality for many girls. This has been a reality, pandemic or not. And in Ireland, we are particularly concerned about this. And clearly, 3 months ago, in a very different reality, we all sat together in the Trusteeship Council of the UN, launching what we called a Drive for Five. That was a global call to action for adolescent girls' education. We wanted then to shine a light on a truth, really, which is that quality, holistic education for girls is the catalyst that can actually deliver on global commitments for gender equality. And we remain concerned even more today that that light is now a flickering light in the current circumstances. On the day 3 months ago, we were joined by several impressive, brilliant young activists, and I'm sure you remember them well as our male champions on the day. We had Secretary General Guterres, of course, championing gender issues from the beginning of this crisis. And we had one of Ireland's own, our humanitarian music hero, Bono. And I have to take the opportunity online to say a belated happy birthday to Bono, who turned 60 on Sunday. Hey. That's a condition a few of us on the screen are aware of. So, but that call to action that we made on that day, where we both had President Robinson, we also had Alice, we also had Phumzile with us, that call is more urgent today than ever. And we're so happy to welcome you back again, dear friends. We believed it was an urgent discussion in February. Today, it's absolutely vital. It's a critical discussion. So if we could have moved to another register in February, we have now moved right there in this COVID crisis. Achieving what we set out in our Drive for 5 is now much harder if we do not act now and ensure that we do not allow COVID to put at risk a generation of young girls and their access to quality education. So really looking forward to hearing from the wonderful, as she was described yesterday, the one and only Chair of the Elders, Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland, the wonderful artist and Global Partnership for Education champion, Cher Youssou, qui est avec nous ce matin, Malala Fund student activist Mariam, who's with us, the CEO of Global Partnership for Education, Alice Albright, and of course, you can see right there on the screen, all the way from South Africa, our dear Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, our Executive Director of UN Women. And we also are honored that today we have several representatives in the audience also from civil society, and we do want to get to all the voices of those who are joining us this morning. We have over 153 participants online now. As I conclude my brief remarks, I want to just to beg your indulgence and to use one phrase in my own dear native language. We say is even braha an scoláire, which in translated roughly means a scholar's life is a very pleasant one. As we're grappling with how to manage schooling during a lockdown, we also have to look ahead and see how can we build back in a way that girls have access to better, full and quality education in the next phase. So ladies and gentlemen, with that, I'm honored to invite Mary Robinson, Chair of the Elders, to share some of her thoughts with us. Mary, you have the floor.
Thank you, Geraldine. And could I just begin by expressing great appreciation to Ireland, to Liberia, to Trinidad and Tobago for bringing us together on this vital subject of girls' education in the context of COVID-19. And I'd like to begin, as you've already done, Geraldine, by remembering that event in the Trusteeship Council in February of this year. We gathered together in a very different context and with a sense of real urgency, because we knew that climate change, the climate crisis, was affecting girls' access, and that there needed to be a drive for 5, the 5 action points that you put forward at that time on behalf of Ireland, and that we all agreed were very important. But I think what I remember most of all was the atmosphere in the Trusteeship Council. I actually remember saying how wonderful it was to be in this sometimes very boring Trusteeship Council, where meet deadly, and have the vitality, the music and the singing of the lovely ethnic choir, multi-ethnic choir. I remember beside Bono, how excited he was. He was almost jumping up and down with enthusiasm for the singing. But also we heard the voices. We heard 4 voices of girls speaking so wonderfully, as I hope we'll hear today as well, from one of our panelists from the Malala Foundation, and a young man who was equally impressive. And that was also good, because this is not an issue for women or girls only. It's an issue predominantly also for men. So it's great to see Youssou here with the ambassadors to speak to this issue. And I remember that we knew that there was already a problem. You mentioned the 130 million girls who don't attend school, who fall through the cracks anyway. And I remember this coming up in the panel that Phumzile moderated with Alice and Bono and myself. And now we have, just a terrible number that I'm reading, approximately 743 million girls because of the closure of schools all over the world. This is devastating, because this means so many more girls will be forced into early child marriage. I know that from the work that the elders did with Mabel Van Orange, at the time our CEO, and now president or CEO, whatever she is, of Girls Not Brides, the network that has continued. I know that Alice, you wrote a very good article recently on the impact. You wrote it with Faith Mwange, what's her name, Powell, of Girls Not Brides, on the further impact of COVID-19, and I'm sure you'll speak very much to this issue. But I can only think, having met some of those girls, having seen the pressure that is there anyway, and then when you have lockdown, when you have isolation, when you have families that have no food, that have to get rid of, you know, the girl because it's another mouth to feed, and how quickly they can fall into child marriage, into adolescent pregnancy, into genital mutilation, all of the problems. Because the truth is, and this is something that we have to hold during this whole conversation, COVID-19 exacerbates all of the inequalities. I've heard it mentioned that COVID-19 is a great leveler. That is not true. It is not a great leveler. COVID-19 exacerbates the intersection between inequality, poverty, race, gender, being marginalized, being an adolescent girl. It makes it all worse. And so we have to think of very positive things. We have to think of how do we, first of all, prioritize within the context of supporting developing countries, the way in which we develop digital learning for them that is very sensitive to the girl, easy, accessible. I'm not an expert on this, but I look to others. But that's what we need, very practical ideas about how we penetrate this awful darkness which has descended because of COVID-19 in closing schools. It's so different from closing schools in Ireland or in the United States or in parts of Europe, etc., where it's still uneven because some schools have better access to Zoom and all these means of distance learning. But children are coping, teachers are reaching out, all is possible. But we have a dark, dark place now where girls, even more girls, are being cut off. And we have to really think of very practical drive for 5 new solutions to address this problem, and address it because of its urgency. Because if a girl becomes pregnant too early, she loses out, her baby will lose out, it probably will die at birth, or it'll be difficult to cope again because of the lockdown and the distance. Becoming pregnant at the moment is more serious and more dangerous for many young women, and particularly for adolescent girls. So all of this, as I said, let's just keep in our heads that COVID-19 has exacerbated all the problems we were talking about in February. They are so much worse, and we have to be so much more energized in addressing those problems. And I look forward very much to hearing some very practical solutions from the panel. Thank you, Geraldine.
Thank you very much indeed, Mary. If that hasn't got us going, absolutely accept the message that we're in now a situation where COVID exacerbates rather than levels the inequalities we're facing. As we came into this phase, I see that we've been joined from the west of Ireland, from one of the most beautiful places in the world, by Ireland's Minister for Diaspora and International Development, Kieran Cannon. You're very welcome, Minister. It's great to see you, and we'll be hearing from you a little bit later in proceedings. So now I'm happy to give the floor to Youssou, well-known artist, Global Partnership for Education champion, all-round wonderful advocate. So Youssou is going to speak to us in French, but it will be interpreted in English. So you just need to click the interpretation button on your screens if you wish to hear a translation. Sinon, il va nous parler en français et vous avez la parole maintenant.
Oui. Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais d'abord, avant même de commencer mon discours, saluer mon ami Bono qui, pour son anniversaire, et lui chanter un petit bout. Besboudelou Simone, Besboudelou Simone, Besbudelu Simone Bono. Besbudelu Simone. Ça, c'est pour Bono. Oui, je remercie Madame l'ambassadrice Nasson, ministre Canon et le gouvernement irlandais, ainsi que le gouvernement du Liberia et de Trinidad pour la conversation opportune de cette discussion. Bienvenue à vous tous qui nous rejoignez ici aujourd'hui, moment de notre vie qui ne peut être décrit que comme extraordinaire. J'espère que vos proches et vous-même allez bien et êtes en bonne santé. C'est un plaisir de faire partie de ce panel avec d'autres leaders et experts de renom, dont Marie Robinson, Phumzile, Mlambo et mon ami Alice O'Brien. Je me réjouis de les entendre ainsi que d'autres membres. Monsieur l'ambassadeur et Mariam Adam Youssou, chers amis, en tant qu'Africain et fier de l'être et surtout père, j'ai pu constater par moi-même le pouvoir de l'éducation des filles et les inégalités qui existent en raison de la pauvreté, des normes et attentes culturelles, des conflits et des fragilités dans le monde. Nous avons constaté des améliorations au cours des 20 dernières années, mais trop lentement. Avec la crise du COVID-19, il aurait fallu encore 100 ans avant que les enfants des pays en développement n'atteignent le niveau d'éducation des pays développés. À quoi ressemble ce chiffre aujourd'hui? Le monde vivait une crise de l'apprentissage avant la pandémie. 260 millions d'enfants et de jeunes âges scolaires n'allaient pas à l'école. C'est pourquoi le sujet dont nous parlons aujourd'hui, pour mieux le reconstruire, me tient à cœur. Transformons la crise en opportunité. En reconstruisant mieux, nous devons embrasser le changement. Les partenaires innovants et mondiaux, nous devons soutenir les gouvernements nationaux et aider à construire des systèmes éducatifs solides qui résistent au choc. Nous devons reconnaître que de nombreux gouvernements en Afrique se sont efforcés d'améliorer l'accès à une éducation de qualité, par exemple en supprimant les frais de scolarité, en augmentant le nombre d'écoles et de salles de classe, ainsi qu'en augmentant la demande d'éducation grâce à des initiatives telles que les programmes d'alimentation scolaire. Bien qu'il reste encore beaucoup à faire, la pandémie a déjà eu de profondes répercussions sur l'éducation. En évoquant la fermeture des écoles presque partout sur la planète, ce qui constitue le plus grand choc simultané pour tous les systèmes éducatifs de notre époque. Les dégâts seront encore plus graves à mesure que l'urgence sanitaire se traduit par une profonde récession mondiale. Tous les participants de ce panel savent qu'en Afrique et dans le monde entier, les écoles sont bien plus qu'un lieu d'apprentissage. Elles sont des lieux de sécurité, de subsistance et d'espoir, en particulier pour les plus vulnérables, qui sont trop souvent les filles des villages ruraux. Étant donné l'augmentation probable de la pauvreté des apprentissages, cette crise pourrait empêcher toute une génération de réaliser son véritable potentiel. C'est pourquoi nous tous, artistes, représentants des institutions internationales et des gouvernements et jeunes, devons agir maintenant pour que nos enfants, en particulier les filles, continuent d'apprendre, soient en sécurité, aspirent à réaliser leurs propres rêves, tout ce que l'éducation peut leur apporter. Plus que jamais, je dois lever la main, ma voix, pour promouvoir une éducation équitable et le travail en collaboration avec le partenariat mondial pour l'éducation. J'ai été le témoin direct dans mon propre pays, le Sénégal, de l'impact du partenariat mondial pour l'éducation, Leur engagement à rassembler l'expertise et les financements derrière un plan gouvernemental pour son propre système d'éducation nationale est remarquable. Mon pays est membre du Partenariat mondial pour l'éducation et nous avons donc notre mot à dire dans l'élaboration des politiques et des programmes qui concernent les filles et les garçons du Sénégal. C'est ce type de solidarité mondiale qui est nécessaire si nous voulons réussir à reconstruire en nous, à construire un avenir meilleur pour nos filles qui, à son tour, sera un avenir meilleur pour nous tous. Je conclus en remerciant Madame l'ambassadrice Nasson de m'avoir invité à participer à ce débat. Chers panélistes, mesdames et messieurs, nous devons aux filles du monde entier de faire mieux et je me réjouis de faire ma part. Je dis, just in English, I'm really concerned about the new money people are going to bring to the table. You know, everywhere around the world, people are talking about new money. I'm just thinking about the poverty. We have to keep this possibility to bring people who are poor in better place. That's really, really, really important. And l'éducation est au début et à la fin de tout. Aujourd'hui, sur la sensibilisation, si les filles et les enfants vont à l'école, ils vont mieux comprendre comment prendre les dispositions sanitaires pour éviter de prendre la maladie. Donc, l'éducation est à la base et au début. Et c'est très important. Je vais m'en arrêter là en vous remerciant, en disant que je reste déterminé, que tous les partenaires doivent aujourd'hui être encore beaucoup plus motivés, parce que si on perd l'éducation, on a tout perdu. Et ça, c'est plus fort que le coronavirus.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Youssou, pour la sagesse, mais aussi pour la chanson, pour Bono. C'était très gentil. Thank you very much indeed, Youssou. So we now are going to ask a dear friend and colleague, my colleague, Ambassador D. Maxwell Kamaya of Liberia, to take the floor. And Kamaya is going to speak to us about the lessons learned from the Ebola crisis and what the key considerations are that we should be now looking ahead to based on your own experience in Liberia. So Kamaya, I'm delighted you're with us. Thank you for being here. And you have the We're just wait. Go ahead, Kamaya.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, Kamaya, we hear you.
Okay. I bring you greetings from His Excellency Dr. George Mane Weah, President of the Republic of Liberia, whose relentless determination to defeating the scourge of COVID-19 remains undaunted. From reports, lives of girls are better today than 25 years ago, especially that between 1998 and 2018, the number of out-of-school girls worldwide dropped by 79 million. Despite this progress, we are aware that significant gaps still subsist, requiring our collective endeavor in addressing such gaps. In the case of Liberia, our adolescent girls are amongst the world's 85% of adolescent girls who live in poverty, and nearly the 25% of adolescent girls in developing countries who are out of school. The number of out-of-school girls was further increased by the Liberian Civil War, which wreaked havoc on Liberia's education sector. about 80% of schools, mainly primary schools, were destroyed, and many teachers fled the country. As Liberia was reeling from the devastating impact of the conflict, Ebola struck in 2014. At the peak of Ebola, all schools were shut down for 6 months, depriving at least 1.5 million school-aged children of their right to education and threatening their health and well-being. During the implementation of the Liberia Adolescent Program, an intervention in view of mitigating the adverse effects of Ebola, we learned that 1 out of 2 girls and boys who enrolled in 6th grade will not continue on to 10th grade without intervention. Adolescent girls and boys transitioning to secondary school in Liberia is complex and embedded in interlinked issues, which are primarily cultural, infrastructure, limited number of schools, and financial. To be specific, these challenges stem from economic constraints, lack of access to transport, girls have to commute miles to school, overage enrollment, lack of parental and community support, and the continuation of the bush schools. Other factors are negative gender norms and harmful traditional practices, including child marriage, adolescent pregnancy, gender-based violence, and lack of society's value for girls' education. In response to these challenges, the government of Liberia, with its partners, instituted a number of programs targeting adolescent girls during and post-Ebola, including 3 ongoing projects, namely Vulnerable Girls Program, Adolescent Girls Empowerment Program under the UN EU Spotlight Initiative, and the ECOWAS Girls of Excellence Scholarship. Others are the Girls Ebola Recovery Livelihood Support Project and the Economic Empowerment of Adolescent Girls and Young Women Project. Both have ended. With a focus on the well-being of vulnerable population in Liberia and pursuant to his unflinching practical commitment toward the empowerment, growth, and development of the women and girls of Liberia, His Excellency President Weah, as Liberia's feminist-in-chief, has instituted a pillow dedicated to the welfare and protection of women and girls as an integral part of the government's response to COVID-19. And it is in this light that Liberia, under the astute leadership of His Excellency President Weah, is very pleased to serve as one of the 3 co-conveners today and welcomes the convening of this international event, building back better education for girls after COVID-19, which underscores and solidifies His Excellency President Weah's intent regarding sustaining visibility, political support, and momentum for women and girls in the context of the global response to COVID-19. COVID-19 reminds of much Liberians have previously witnessed: the disruption in social life and economic activities, and the current devastating impact on the livelihood of households and the national economy. Another shock to our existing fragile economy. Hence, it is likely the government of Liberia's post-COVID-19 recovery plan will place emphasis on the economy. The socio-economic consequences of COVID-19 will have a corresponding adverse impact on achievements relating to adolescent girls, including their education. As has been an important lesson learned, it is essential to stress the need for the local, national, and international partners and stakeholders to ensure that timely mitigating interventions are instituted and supported for building back better education for girls after COVID-19. The earlier policies are put in place and supported, the more effective the implementation. These policies and plans must endeavor to address challenges such as literacy, school retention, early and forced marriages, teenage pregnancies, sexual abuse and exploitation, violence, economic empowerment, livelihood, and other harmful cultural practices. These are critical areas which, when adequately addressed, will have transformational results and help in the alleviation of the cycle of poverty and ensure that the rights of adolescent girls are maintained and protected. Regarding the bush schools, the need to continue dialogue between and among government, relevant institutions, traditional leaders, communities, and civil society organizations in order to further raise awareness on the importance of the education of girls cannot be overly emphasized. Rural parents, especially mothers, are of the conviction that the bush schools prepare their daughters for marriage and to take on family values, including assisting in cultivating farmland and selling farm produce. As we encourage parents to consider sending their daughters to school, we should also contemplate means to incentivize parents to alleviate the barriers that hold back their daughters from school enrollment. Hence, it is also critical to ensure that the government of Liberia's multi-pronged initiatives towards adolescent girls, such as the Vulnerable Girls Program, which aims at retaining adolescent girls in primary and secondary schools with a target of enrolling 200 at-risk and vulnerable adolescent girls annually into private and public boarding schools, as well as day schools, and its economic empowerment program, which is intended to provide adolescent girls with livelihood, life skills training, and financial and small business management, should remain operational, financed, strengthened, and expanded to increase the number of girls and geographic area. In view of the spiraling effects of the crisis, particularly on the economies of developing countries, we renew our call for international cooperation, unity, solidarity, and commitment to fight COVID-19 and prevent developing countries from deeper economic downfall, which will have a reactionary cascading effect and the propensity to undermine efforts aimed at building back better education for girls after COVID-19. Finally, on behalf of His Excellency President Weah and the government and people of Liberia, we thank all our local, national, and international partners, including the United Nations system, for the assistance to Liberia aimed at ensuring the protection of the rights of adolescent girls and women and girls in general. We also thank Her Excellency Mary Robinson, Chair of the Elders, the Executive Director of UN Women, and other panelists for their excellent insights shared on this matter, as well as everyone who made it a priority to participate in this event. Warm thanks to my colleagues, the permanent representatives of Ireland and Trinidad and Tobago to the UN, who partnered with me in co-convening this event, building back better education for girls after COVID-19. Special thanks to the Republic of Ireland for leading the drive for 5 initiatives, a global call to action. Education for all girls is a must. It is a human right, neither an option nor a favor. We have a collective responsibility to act now. Let us together act. COVID-19 must not stop us, and absolutely nothing must stop us, as educating a girl is educating a nation, and educating a nation is educating the world. I thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Kamaya. Inspiring words. Ladies and gentlemen, just to let you know that as we now go to hear from a wonderful young activist from the Malala Foundation, Mariam, we're joined online by over 274 participants. We're split between Zoom and YouTube, but I just wanted to encourage you, knowing that this is really of such real interest to so many people. So Mariam, you've been waiting patiently this morning. We're thrilled you're with us. Mariam is with us on the ground at home in Nigeria, but she's someone who's been directly affected herself by school closures and has been using her time, of course, very constructively to help others. So she's going to tell us a little bit about how she's doing. You're very welcome, Mariam.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here. My name is Mariam Adam. I'm from Sokoto State. I live with my mom and my 5 siblings here in Abuja. And my mom has been the one encouraging me. She encourages me every day, go to school, read, pursue your dreams. And she's been the one, she's been my guide, and I've been doing well. I attend Kaduna State University. This is my first year, and due to coronavirus, we are all back home. They sent us back home. We're all home. We returned home, and there's this lockdown. I love my school. I like my school. I like the teachers. I made new friends. I hoped a lot this year. I thought I was going to make so many different things, but due to COVID-19 and the lockdown, everything has been shut down for us students, and we're not happy about that. My school has offered to give us online lectures, but I think it's a good idea, but it's actually also not a good idea, because almost in about 5 households, only 1 household have access to the internet. Somebody like me, I do not have access to the internet, and also even it will affect so many students, like the science and technology students. They won't be able to access laboratories for their practicals. So the government should please look into this, and they should please bring education to us even during this lockdown. I've been using my time to teach children in my community how to identify the alphabets and the numbers. It's actually been a good thing to me. It's been keeping me active. It's been making me happy. I feel I'm learning more from them than they are from me. And also I was a part of a leadership club in my school, where I learned to gain confidence to be a leader, where I could use my voice for issues like this, issues like how I could stand up for girls, where we gain confidence, where they encourage us to be leaders. And due to COVID-19 pandemic and the closure of schools, so many girls are at home, and I think it will affect them, because some girls come from abusive homes, especially those that come from abusive homes. It might lead them to early pregnancies, like early marriage, like my classmates. There are so many of my classmates now that I know are getting married due to poverty. Their parents have lost their jobs. They cannot afford their school fees. They cannot even feed them properly every day. So that forces the parents to get them married. And some that will not be able to get married, their lives may spoil them. Their life might change. They might end up going after men for money, and I wouldn't want that to happen. And also due to the closure of schools and the lockdown, so many girls will are dropping out of school. So many girls are dropping out of school because their parents are weak, their parents don't have money, and their parents are losing their jobs. They don't have money to take them back to school. I would really appreciate it if the government would look into this and they would help the future of girls everywhere, and they would, and I hope the leaders would listen to girls like me. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mariam. I can guarantee you that that's what we're here to do, is to listen to girls like you. Really appreciate what you had to say. That's a reality check for all of us. This is not an abstract issue. This is real life every day on the ground, and your remarks were particularly helpful for us. And indeed, as I now introduce the CEO of Global Partnership for Education, Alice Albright, I know that she will have some very concrete and hopefully positive things to tell us as she looks at the kind of actions based on the extraordinary leadership that Global Partnership for Education shows. Alice, you were with us 3 months ago. You've heard a reality check now. We're very interested in what you have to say to us.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Nason, your team at the Irish Mission, also, of course, the governments of Liberia and Trinidad for convening this critical conversation. Indeed, I remember so fondly when we were together in New York, and it seems sadly like a century ago. Phumzile, it's wonderful to see you. We always enjoy working with you. Also, Minister Cannon, it's wonderful to see you there. You're down in the corner on my screen. It's wonderful to see you. And of course, Youssou, we're delighted to see you. Nous sommes ravis que vous soyez avec nous aujourd'hui. And you are, of course, one of our great champions at GPE. I'd like to, if I may, speak about 3 points today: equity, financing, and global solidarity. On the point of equity, so much has changed in the world since we met last to discuss girls' education, and it seems almost impossible to imagine our life pre-COVID. I applaud everyone's efforts around the world to deal with this global health pandemic. In many ways, the health crisis that we are working through right now is becoming an education crisis. And the most immediate impact of school closures, of course, is an increasing equity gap, and an equity gap that is widening. And yet again, it is adolescent girls from the poorest households that will bear the brunt of this crisis. As many of you have said, schools are much more than places of learning. They're often a lifeline, often a place where food is provided, protection, and friendship. But as we know, even before COVID hit, 130 million girls are not going to school. And many of those that are in school are not learning. Many millions are dropping out and not being in school, and often we see this at rates faster than boys. And while we've made some progress at closing the gender equity gap, now all of those gains over the last 20 years are at risk of being rolled back. So, as my friend Youssou has shared, as my friend Mary Robinson has shared, this is an opportunity to turn the tide and not revert this to the status quo. So a few thoughts on building back better. As schools begin to reopen and governments think about what their policies are going forward, governments should develop policies and work with parents to encourage re-enrollment. And this includes removing barriers that have kept girls out of school. For example, policies that look to keep pregnant girls out of school. We need to invest and support resilient education systems, and there are many dimensions to what this challenge involves, such as looking at infrastructure, health, safety, cash transfers, food rations, supply chains, assessing the protocols for returning back to school, inventing and working through distance learning programs. It is a long list, but the crisis that we're in now gives us a chance to figure out how to build back better. These measures will all have a cost. Right now, of course, resources the governments have are squeezed, and we're very worried there's a chance that education resources will get cut. Which brings me to my second point, which is about education finance. We must safeguard unwittingly balancing budgets budgets on the backs of school children. Therefore, global solidarity is required to ensure that social services critical to protecting children, be it health and education, are not in competition with each other for funding. We are starting to see the tip of the iceberg that the macroeconomics of COVID-19 will have. The world is already in a recession, as some of the poorest regions of the world, including many GPE partner countries, will face critical economic challenges, plunging GDP, shrinking tax bases, and a decrease in the overall fiscal space, which will severely constrain the ability of governments to continue to invest in education. Developing countries will see less foreign direct investment, fewer remittances, lower foreign aid, specifically at the time that they need more help. Household income will decline, and many families will be faced with unthinkable choices, like which child ought to go to work, and hopefully that choice will not disadvantage girls. So therefore, I think we need to put in place a razor-sharp focus on the question of financing, and hope that a short-term, and work together that a short-term health crisis is not going to turn into a long-term generational education crisis. And that brings me to my final point, which is about solidarity. As GPE looked at the world beginning to unfold around COVID, we knew how important it would be to act quickly and support our partner countries. Within 2 weeks of the declaration of the pandemic, GPE put in place an $8.8 million window to enable countries to figure out how to kickstart their response to education. Just a week or so later, we put in place a $250 million COVID response window and have since moved very quickly to get funding out to partner countries. The money will be used principally around helping governments recover and get their education systems back on their feet. Our focus will be on the poorest and most vulnerable countries, especially with an eye towards girls. Right now, the demand for GPE funding is significant, and we continue to call on partners throughout the world to help meet the demand that we see. Another thing that we're doing is reaching out to our partner governments to enable them to share their ideas and best practice and their good ideas for helping to contend with the crisis. Last week, we had a phone call that was led by Minister Senge from Sierra Leone with 20 ministers of education where they could share their ideas about how to contend with the crisis. I'm very pleased to say that the Minister of Education from Liberia was also with us, Ambassador Kamaya, and made some wonderful contributions. So finally, my dear friends, I'd like to ask for your help. GPE is not only in the middle of a strategic planning crisis, but we're also asking ourselves, how can we work as close as we can with countries to help them build the resilience in their education systems that they need, not only to take them through the current crisis, but beyond. We're also in the middle of kicking off our replenishment effort, which will occur sometime next year, and we hope that we can count on your support. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for inviting me to join, and I wish you all the best as we work towards contending with this very, very difficult crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Alice. Lots of concrete ideas there that I hope will generate a lot of reaction also in our panel discussion from the floor afterwards. So now we go to South Africa to our extraordinary friend and advocate, the Executive Director of UN Women, dear Phumzile. We're thrilled you could be with us today. We miss you, Phumzile. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone in the room. A lot has already been said, which I totally agree with, so I will not repeat. Let me just start by saying that 2020 was a year we were all looking forward to as a big year for women and girls, where we would mark the 25 years of the Beijing Declaration, where we would look at the 20 years of implementing the Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, and see how we could close the gaps, because on both those agreements, we have not achieved what we set ourselves to achieve. So we are going to look at celebrating the modest progress that we have made, but also work very hard to consolidate our efforts to move forward. Right now, more than ever before, that consolidation of our efforts to move forward is needed. Generation equality, which was going to be our springboard for that work, has not been cancelled. It has been postponed to 2021. But between now and then, we are going to be working very hard to make sure that we address all the issues that we already addressed. The girls group, the education group that deals with all of these issues that we're discussing, Mary knows about it because we've talked about it. Geraldine, we've spoken about it. Alice, we've spoken about it. It's even more needed now. And I'm glad that we're having this time in order to keep ourselves, keep our eyes on the ball, because this is something we have to crack. As our gains are being threatened by this pandemic, we have to do much more in order to make sure that we don't reel backwards. But this year is a big year for women and girls, because women this year saved humanity. They are the ones who are the majority of those who are shouldering the COVID-19 response, and they are paying the price because many of the health workers who are dying in the front lines are actually women. 85% of them are nurses, of nurses are women. And today, of course, is their special day. So we celebrate nurses today. But this year, it was not the big year for women and girls in a manner that we had planned it, but it became a big way for women in a different way, in that it has shown us the importance of solidarity. It has shown us the inequalities in education like we've never seen them before. And my recommendation would be that let us focus as we build better to bring the infrastructure that makes the high number of girls in developing countries to fall out of the online learning possibilities that is there. Let us close this gap, and we have to do it in this academic year. Let us also this year continue with passing and tightening up the laws that prohibit marriage of children. Let us make sure that we do not stop that work because it is a crisis. Many countries were about to pass their legislation, and right now we're working very hard to make sure that we address this because we can see the danger of child marriage that is facing us. Let us also make sure that we build stronger mechanism for reinforcement. We also need to work with traditional leaders, something that we've put a lot of investment as UN Women, because we actually need them in this new world that we are now in. We need to make sure that we transform everyone in the ecosystem, in the communities that is needed to protect and to support women and girls. And of course, let us also make sure that the gains that we made in maternal health, which are under threat now as many health systems and hospitals are going to be struggling to deal with the number of patients they have. Many mothers who are now beginning to become accustomed to give birth in formal and hygienic settings are going to find themselves having to give birth in unsafe conditions. That too is a gain we cannot afford to lose, because some of these girls may end up having early pregnancies, and in these situations, they are sure to suffer and to die. So our work has just gotten very complicated, but I'm glad to see that we all comprehend what we are facing. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Phumzile. A real clarity and the scale of the challenge ahead. We're very appreciative that you took the time to be with us and for everything you do, Phumzile. Now we're moving into the phase where we will actually be able to open up discussion. It's going to be led off for us by our co-host, Penelope Beckles, my dear colleague from Trinidad and Tobago, who's the former president of the Executive Board of UN Women, and also currently vice president there, but a gender champion also, which of course is another reason for being thrilled she's with us. As Penelope takes the floor to speak, I'm watching the chat room. We have lots of you coming in requesting the floor, and after Penelope speaks, we will come back to offer the floor to colleagues in groups of 5 or 6 speakers each before we hear from Minister Cannon at the end. So dear Penelope, you're very welcome. It's great to see you on the screen. You have the floor.
Great, thank you, Geraldine, and I'll try not to be too long because I see so many requests for the floor. But let me, of course, acknowledge the former President of Ireland, Her Excellency Mary Robinson, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, UN Women Executive Director, Minister Cannon, panelists, and of course, our fellow excellencies. I'm really grateful for this wonderful opportunity to participate in this very important discussion on adolescent girls. Adolescence is the most critical phase of growth, as it is the transition phase from a child to adult. Therefore, ensuring that our girls receive a well-rounded education post-COVID-19 is of utmost importance, and this can make or break their future. I grew up in a very rural community in my Trinidad and Tobago, but was motivated enough to be where I am today. As a result of my experience as an adolescent, it is my priority to reach out to girls and motivate them to believe that anything is possible despite the challenges they have faced or are currently facing. In this regard, I have committed to focusing on STEM and sports as my SMART objectives in the IGC, as I believe that education for our adolescent girls should not only be in the areas of languages, teaching, or nursing, but we should educate our young women to also excel in areas traditionally dominated by men, such as STEM and sports. As a former athlete, I can testify about the importance of sports in the development of girls' self-confidence and the development of your leadership qualities. In the context of COVID-19, it is clear that the inequalities experienced by our adolescent girls, specifically in the education sector, may have significantly increased due to the lack of access to technology, in addition to being forced to forfeit schooling in order to help take care of their families. There may be also a spike in early marriages, as parents see this as a solution to decreasing the burden of the household with less mouths to feed. This is indeed a very troubling and sad reality. Further, our adolescent girls may not be encouraged to stand for themselves with the fear and threat of being violated. It is therefore our duty as women leaders to commit to ensure that our adolescent girls' education is not forgotten and sacrificed post-COVID in the fight to build back our country's economy. We must continue to ensure their access to technology, as well as the development of action-oriented, as well as time-bound policies and programs aimed at protecting our girls. We also need to focus on data collection and statistical analysis of adolescent girls in each region and our country, since each culture is different. We also need to ask ourselves, how do we reach our grassroots? How do our institutions reach the grassroots? In this regard, it is utmost importance that multilateral institutions such as UN Women, UNICEF, and the initiatives such as the IGC play a leading role in ensuring that adolescent girls continue to be educated post-COVID-19 by working together to ensure cooperation at all levels and by engaging fully governments and civil society. We must be able to have a positive impact on our adolescent girls who are most affected by this pandemic, such as those living in extreme poverty, affected by climate change and natural disasters, and living in areas of armed conflict. We remain committed to ensuring that they be educated on all facets of life by equipping them with the necessary tools to do so, such as technology, access to healthcare, mental health counseling services, career guidance, food security, and nutrition. In the Caribbean, although 94% of girls receive an education, Unlike the global trend, one of the most troubling areas of gender inequality is the gender-based violence. This includes our adolescent girls. Therefore, we must also focus on educating our girls in this regard. Finally, we must acknowledge that women are healthy and educated. Their families, when women are healthy and educated, their families, communities, and societies thrive. It is therefore in our interest to ensure that our adolescent girls have both the opportunity and the necessary tools to fulfill their highest potential. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Penny. Thank you very much for your wise and insightful presentation. We now have roughly a half an hour to go, ladies and gentlemen, and we have a growing list of speakers. We have over a dozen speakers looking for the floor. I'll read the first 6 initially, and if I could ask you all to be very focused and concrete in your interventions. The list is my colleague Martin from Denmark, my colleague Sheikh from Senegal, followed by Sofiane of Algeria, Susan of Kenya, Alejandro from Argentina, and Tom of the UK, and then we'll come to the second group of 6. So Martin, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Geraldine. Let me begin by thanking you, Penelope and Kemaya for convening us. And in doing so, actually trying to put into very, very concrete terms what building back better also means. You know, what does it actually mean to recover better? I think it is crucially important that we get the discussion going and move beyond the slogans and start discussing the specifics of what it is we need to do. Also want to convey my thanks to Alice. Good to see you again. I think Alice, last time we met was in the beautiful city of Dakar, actually at the last replenishment conference for GP, where I was proud to represent Denmark and my Prime Minister with our commitment to GP. I'm confident that Denmark will continue this. Also to Phumzile, good to see you, Phumzile. We hope to have you back in New York soon. And then finally to Mary Robinson for sharing your wisdom and your insights. They're needed more than ever before, and it has become a personal daily highlight to participate in virtual meetings with you, Mary Robinson. But my most profound thanks to Mariam for carrying the torch, not only for yourself, but for all your fellow students. And of course to Minister Cannon for your wise words. I have quite simple message from us, and that is if youth education and gender equality was important before COVID-19, it is, if that is at all possible, even more important now. And there is perhaps no single one area where it is more important that we actually recover better, that we do the course correction that was needed already before COVID-19, because that is the only way that we will make sure the world recover as fast as it possibly can. And Denmark is with you all the way. I'll stop there, Geraldine. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much indeed, Martin. So the next speaker is our dear friend Sheikh from Senegal, the ambassador of Senegal. You have the floor, Sheikh.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Sheikh. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, my dear friend Geraldine. Let me first thank you very much, you and the co-host, for holding this very, very important event. I would say that, first of all, what I wanted to say has been really preempted by what my compatriot Youssou has already said. And I just wanted to maybe ask a question and about the current situation we are in right now. And the current situation is putting, as you know, adolescent girls in a very, very bad situation. My question is, in the current situation, a discussion to all the panelists, how do you think governments can better, let's say, coordinate and implement policies in order to rescue adolescent girls who are in a bad situation, who are being educated, and we are under threat? So this is the question I want to do. And also, what do you think can be done towards those adolescent girls who are in the most vulnerable areas? But let me also seize the opportunity to say hi to Youssou. Very proud to see him. I'm very proud to see him being very active in this field. Youssou nuyu naa la bu baax jërëjëf. Thank you, Geraldine.
Thank you very much indeed, dear Sheikh. And I want to thank both the first speakers for setting a great pace here with concrete, focused comments. So now we give the floor to my colleague from Algeria, Sofiane, who will be followed by Susan from Kenya. Sofiane, you have the floor.
Thank you, Geraldine. You hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, Sofiane, we hear you.
Okay. Well, I would like, first of all, to thank you, Ambassador Geraldine, thank also Ambassador Penelope and Ambassador Kemaya for organizing this important panel in order to discuss the impact of COVID-19 on the education of our children, but also on the way to build better in the aftermath of this pandemic. With all protocol observed, I would like to greet the panelists participating in this meeting today and thank them for their insightful comments. Let me at the outset pay a special tribute to the first responders worldwide who are playing a major role in the response against COVID-19. I would like also to express my solidarity with those families who have been affected by the disease, losing family members or facing economic hardship. Let me also commend the tremendous work carried out by UN Women, UNICEF, UNESCO, and civil society on the ground. As we are all facing this fast-moving crisis, we recognize that the impacts of COVID-19 across the global economy will be profound on everyone across all spheres. These impacts will disproportionately affect girls and adolescents, entrenching the gender gaps, especially in education, which leads to increased risk of illiteracy, development inequalities, poverty, violence, and exploitation. In this context, UNESCO estimates that out of the total population of students enrolled in education globally, over 89% are currently out of school because of COVID-19 closures. And a great number of these are girls living under the world's least developed countries, where getting an education is already a struggle. Furthermore, and due to school closure, the COVID-19 crisis has exposed vast disparities in the availability of learning materials, including access to internet. Even though much focus has turned to online learning platforms during the pandemic, many public schools, especially in developing countries, are not set up to use them or do not have the technology and equipment to provide online teaching. The digital divide leads to limited or lack of education for many children, especially girls and adolescents. And while many girls will continue with their education once the school gates reopen, others will never return to school. In facing this situation, we need to protect the progress made and prevent the risk of reversing many years of gains made for girls' education by taking into account their needs in the national educational responses. In this regard, as we are thinking in building back better in the aftermath of the COVID-19, we can leverage those challenges and transform them into opportunities for change and improvement in our education systems and international cooperation in this field through the following 5 actions. First, minimizing school dropout, especially for girls. In this regard, school reopening would need to be preceded by a re-enrollment campaign, especially for girls who are at higher risk of dropout. For greater effectiveness, re-enrollment campaigns should be supported by awareness-raising actions as well as communication programs with targeted features to better reach girls. Second, strengthening gender-sensitive professional development for teachers in order to better respond to specific needs of girls and adolescent teachers will require professional development and guidance through training to assess learning loss due to school closures, training to reach a right level for those who couldn't benefit from remote learning during the pandemic, as well as training to support girls and adolescents facing high level of stress and risk on mental health. Also, training on digital skills for teachers will be key in a context where the new normal will increasingly involve the use of technological tools and remote learning alternatives. Third, adopting appropriate distance learning practices. In contexts where digital solutions are less accessible, it is important to consider how approaches to ensure inclusive online teaching. It is also necessary to ensure that girls are trained with necessary digital skills, including the knowledge and skills they need to stay safe online. Fourth, broadening international cooperation to access technology and eliminate inequities. This crisis has exposed the extreme inequity in the school system worldwide. The most obvious is the digital divide that plagues between developing and developed countries, where girls and adolescents are struggling even more to access education. On this particular matter, a global action to bridge the development and digital divide between the developing and developed country is more than needed in order to keep children learning and help government to scale up home learning option in the context of this pandemic and its aftermath. Finally, raising investment and financing programs in the above-mentioned actions to support and reinforce the shift to an education system that is more equitable, resilient, and gender sensitive. These are some observations and comments I wanted to share with you during this panel, and I thank you sincerely. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, dear Sofiane. We're now going to take the rest of those who have indicated they have looked for the floor. We have another 7 speakers, so I'm watching the clock. If you can please keep your comments short, so we have an opportunity to hear from the panel, but also from Minister Cannon at the very end. So now we give the floor to our colleague from Kenya, Susan Mwangi, the Deputy Permanent Representative of Kenya. You have the floor, dear Susan.
Thank you, Ambassador, and my sincere gratitude to the permanent nations of Ireland, Liberia, and Trinidad and Tobago for organizing this important and timely meeting on education. I also wish to thank all the panelists for their insightful remarks and their tireless efforts in enhancing gender equality in education. From listening to all the speakers, virtual education has been broadly adopted as one of the measures to contain the spread of the virus. Yet this is a great challenge for developing countries such as Kenya, where virtual education might not reach all children. We have also noted reports of increased instances of domestic violence against women and girls, confirming the remarks that were shared by Ms. Albright that adolescent girls will inevitably bear the brunt of the crisis. The government of Kenya continues to enhance targeted interventions aimed at promoting participation in education for adolescent girls. And as pointed out by Mr. Youssou, schools are much more than learning institutions, especially for girls, because these are also the places of safety and sustenance for girls. And the COVID-19 pandemic only exacerbates the existing challenges of educating, protecting, and supporting our girls. What COVID-19 has taught us is that international cooperation and global solidarities are imperative in coming up with measures and resources to help developing countries cope with the evolving challenges and build better preparedness for the future. We need to continue working together more than ever to ensure no adolescent girl is left behind in attaining the right to education and to develop and thrive towards realizing their full potential. My question now, I just want to Ms. Albright to share her thoughts on how global solidarity can be enhanced to support the capacity of developing countries to access and utilize the digital learning platform, particularly for adolescent girls during and post-COVID-19 pandemic. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Susan. And now we have Alejandro of Argentina. You're welcome to take the floor, Alejandro.
Thank you very much, dear Geraldine. Thank you, all the organizers. Got the honor to see again Ms. Robinson, Ms. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, and Ms. Albright. Widespread closure of schools has interrupted the education of more than 1 billion children, according to the Secretary General Policy Brief on COVID-19 and human rights. Therefore, it is essential to address policies on the impact of school closures, physical distancing, and containment strategies on girls, adolescents, and young women, as they may be expected to take unpaid care duties, limiting their access to remote learning programs, as well as take into account that they might be more exposed to sexual and gender-based violence due to confinement measures. Moreover, it is of utmost importance to recognize that despite gains in providing access to education, girls are still more likely than boys to remain excluded from education. Among the gender-based specific barriers to girls' equal enjoyment of their right to education are the feminization of poverty, child labor undertaken by girls, child early and forced marriage, all forms of gender-based violence, and disproportionate share of unpaid care, and domestic work performed by girls, and gender stereotypes and negative social norms that lead families and communities to take place less values on the education of girls. In Argentina, since March, we have had general lockdown that included every education institution, preschools, schools, universities, as well as tertiary education institutions. For the time being, the Ministry of Education has developed a set of virtual tools to try to minimize the impact of the pandemic. At this moment, we still don't know when children will be able to go back to school, given that having classes in Argentina means that 15 million people mobilize every day. So now we are also facing multiple challenges, not only trying to ensure that activities, virtual classes, and any type of learning tool reaches every kid, but also thinking how in the mid-long term we will be able to go back to some normalcy. The Ministry of Education is planning a dual system combining virtual classes with the rotation of classes in person. We will prioritize 3 groups of students: those in the last year of high school, who will receive an extra module for next year, first quarter, students that are in the last year of primary school, and children learning how to read and write. For Argentina, in this context where the whole education depends on having a computer, it is even more important to close the digital divide. And this division exists not only between the rich and poor, but also between boys and girls. To conclude, in the context of this crisis, states need to effectively address pre-existing inequalities and guarantee the right to education to everyone by ensuring well-resourced education system able to quickly switch to distance learning in order not to leave anyone behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Alejandro. We now have about 20 minutes, even stretching it slightly left, and we still have 6 speakers. So I'm going to take a leap and say that we will go to each speaker. Please keep your remarks as brief as you possibly can. We won't take another tour around the panel again. We are producing an outcome document from this discussion. And what I would like to do as host today with my colleagues from Liberia and Trinidad and Tobago is to go back and speak to each panelist and see if we can incorporate reactions into the outcome document. We will therefore, once we've had these speakers, come to Minister Cannon and then wrap up. So, ladies and gentlemen, the order of speakers now is Tom of the UK, our colleague from Egypt, then Maria of Spain, Odinga from Norway, followed by Takeshi of Japan, Plan International, where Lila will speak to us, followed by the last speaker of the mission of the United Arab Emirates today. And then Minister Cannon, we will come to hear some closing remarks from you. So Tom, you have the floor if we can really encourage everyone to be brief.
For organizing this event, you and your colleagues, your co-organizers. I also remember very fondly the event in the Trusteeship Council, and particularly the very moving musical performance at the end. It was wonderful. As I think you know, Ambassador, and as we've spoken about, girls' education is a huge priority, personal priority for my Prime Minister, both when he was Foreign Secretary and now when he's in number 10. And he has recently, actually in March this year, asked Baroness Sugg, who's a member of the House of Lords and a minister in our Department for International Development, to act as his special envoy on girls' education. And she is leading the development of an ambitious strategy that will pull together our diplomatic and development efforts over the next 5 years on this agenda, and which of course will now need to reflect all of the challenges that the panelists have outlined posed by COVID-19. And that of course is on top of the significant funding that we put into this issue, whether it's through the UK's own Girls' Education Challenge Fund or the Global Partnership for Education or the International Finance Facility. My question, I think, is around coordination and how one of the outcomes, I think, of the COVID-19 challenge is seeing how it's encouraged the UN system to come together and recognize that by working together around issues, it amplifies the impact of what it can do. So my question really was for Phumzile, but I don't think we have her anymore on screen. It was essentially about how can we ensure that the UN system, whether that's UN Women or UNESCO or UNICEF, is working together around this agenda. How can we ensure that they are working more broadly with civil society and the IFIs, so that we have a shared understanding of what the priorities are, and then also more importantly, a shared understanding of what the actions and responses that are needed to tackle those priorities. So there you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. And now we go to our colleague from Egypt. You have the floor, and we'll be followed by our colleague from Spain.
Geraldine, Ireland has always been at the forefront of championing such critical causes as education and remains a dependable partner to work with. Thank you to all the panelists and speakers, Your Excellencies, representatives of Liberia, Trinidad and Tobago, Executive Director, UN Women, Global Partnership for Education, and the artist Youssou, and a sincere appreciation for Her Excellency Mary Robinson, who remains an iconic inspiration for many around the world. It's particularly heartening to see with us as well a representative of the Malala Fund. Mariam, your words do justice to that young girl whose fund is named after. The negative impacts of COVID-19 on adolescent girls' education, especially in Africa, were highlighted in both the Secretary General's policy briefing regarding COVID-19 impacts on women and his policy briefing regarding COVID-19 impacts on children. And it remains a cornerstone of any national or international measures taken towards sustainable development. Egypt, I'm glad to highlight, has been at the forefront of such measures. Our National Council for Women early in the pandemic established a policy paper regarding the rapid response to women's situation during the pandemic, and this policy paper was shared with UN Women and circulated to all member states as part of our continued efforts to exchange experiences. The policy contains special measures that resonate closely with what was mentioned in the panel today, to be taken by the government and its partners to address the school closure and heightened pressures that girls in particular may face to not return to schools, to contribute to supporting their households financially and or to marry and have children when they are still children themselves. To also focus on how to incentivize parents to ensure their children return to school, and it remains now a central policy paper that the government is working on implementing. On the international level, Egypt, with a number of countries, presented on the 22nd of April a comprehensive action-oriented draft resolution strengthening national and international rapid response to the impact of COVID-19 on women and girls. And this draft resolution contains many paragraphs addressing this situation and the containment strategies on adolescent girls' educations, especially in developing countries. Again, it resonates with what was mentioned by several panelists here about presenting practical action-oriented measures that aspire to effect a direct impact on the ground. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Thank you very much indeed for your comments. And now we go to Spain, to Maria. You have the floor, Maria.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody, panelists and organizers, for this very timely webinar. in which I'm very happy to attend and to speak as a daughter, as the mother of a daughter, as a woman, and as a diplomat. We're all doing our part to contribute in the most positive and constructive way in the many facets that this pandemic shows to us. We are also trying to join forces with other member states. Each one of us does its part and its role around women and COVID-19. You will remember that on the 9th of April, the Secretary General published a very inspired policy brief on women and COVID-19. And Spain undertook the work with many of our colleagues at the United Nations to work on a resolution that would give more voice to this policy brief and that would undertake all the problems that women are now facing on top of the pre-existing ones due to COVID-19. This resolution, which is now in its last stages and near the final part to becoming a chair's draft, what it aims to is to support the Secretary General and the work by UN Women on this issue. It also addresses pre-existing problems that COVID-19 has now widened and deepened and enhanced. It is action-oriented because we want to inspire governments and as well as other stakeholders who are listening today when they are confronted by the need to build back better. And it is a resolution that reflects in its operative paragraph, and this was the information that I wanted to share with you, the OP8, that reflects the problem that we have talked about today. In this operative paragraph 8, it underlines the importance of the right of education for girls during times of crisis, such as the one we are undergoing today. It also acknowledges that adolescent girls are at particular risk of dropping out from school and from their studies and not returning to those schools after the crisis is over. And it calls upon member states to ensure that girls are supported to return to school in the future once it is deemed safe to do so. But we're still working on the resolution and on building up this paragraph, and this was so important. This is why it was so important for me to be here and to listen to all of you and to listen to your proposals, dear panelists, and I have done so. So we will continue working in that direction, and hopefully when the resolution comes out, you will have a paragraph there, or more than a paragraph, that will be of use to everybody. Thank you so much, Geraldine.
Thank you very much, Maria. We put wind in your sails to get to that point, and we, as you know, we fully support that very important work. We now have 3 colleagues left to speak. Odinga, our colleague from Norway, Takeshi from Japan, followed by Plan International, and then we will go to Minister Cannon to wrap up remarks. Just to comment that we still have almost 200 people with us between Zoom and YouTube. So Odinga, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Geraldine. Thank you for convening us, and many, many thanks to all the presenters and all the interventions today on this very, very important topic. From the Norway side, we are worried that the pandemic may reverse 20 years of progress when it comes to education and girls. Experiences from other crises have taught us that girls are often particularly vulnerable in times of crisis, especially when the schools are closed. Many may not find the way back to the school bench again. Girls' education is therefore a key priority for Norway, and we have for a long time worked closely with UNESCO, UNICEF, the Global Partnership for Education, and others to contribute to that all girls can have access to education. The Global Education Coalition, under UNESCO's leadership, will be an important initiative as it seeks to facilitate inclusive learning opportunities for children and youth during this period of sudden and unprecedented educational disruption. Many countries are using digital tools, but for the most vulnerable countries, radio, TV, and printed material would be the most practical. The coalition will coordinate this important effort to reach the most vulnerable, including women and girls. Now, it is important that we continue to support key UN organizations in their work. Norway is among the top providers of core and other non-earmarked contributions to the UN, and we believe that this flexibility is crucial to reach those who need it the most when it is needed. We are also pleased that the Secretary General's COVID-19 response and recovery fund that Norway proposed is now a reality. It will support developing countries in overcoming the consequences of the corona crisis and help countries recover better, also when it comes to education. Norway's already made a first contribution of 150 million Norwegian kroners, and we encourage others to contribute too. I'll leave it at that. I know there's many speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gerard Inga. Thank you very much. Takeshi, and then we have the last speaker before Minister Cannon. Takeshi, you have the floor.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I have some information to share regarding the new money that was emphasized by Youssou and others during their interventions, and one question, or rather suggestion, on the way forward. Information to share is that in end of April, Japan decided to contribute $4.5 million to UN Women for their projects to cope with, specifically with COVID-19 in different parts, regions, developing regions in the world. Also, we have contributed in March about $830,000 to GPE. Thank you, Ms. Albright, for sending a very kind letter to my minister last week. Thirdly, 2 years ago, during the 2018 Charlevoix G7 summit, Japan made a commitment to contribute $200 million over the 3 coming years for girls' education and capacity building, and we're continuing to work to fulfill our commitment. These are all new money. So that's the information I wanted to share. One suggestion, under the current COVID situation, which is a serious and wide-ranging human security crisis, different organizations and agencies and entities are all trying to highlight the impact of the COVID-19 on the group of vulnerable people under their respective mandate, like aged people, people with disabilities, youth, children, refugees, etc., etc. And also different organizations are trying to highlight themes under their mandate, health, education, human rights, economic downturn, etc. It would be very useful if for our agenda, which is education for adolescent girls, if those who work on the ground could share more concrete symbolic examples like the ones that were explained by Ms. Mariam Adam, or something like domestic violence caused by COVID. So that those examples could show specific vulnerabilities of girls under COVID circumstances compared to, for example, boys, not in general terms, but in specifically under COVID and post-COVID context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. They're good suggestions, and we will follow up on those. So now we come to the final speaker from our floor, which is representative, I'm delighted, of civil society. We were delighted to have lots of members of civil society with us this morning. We have Lila from Plan International, and then I'll give the floor to Minister Kieran Cannon on the west of Ireland, the coast there, to wrap this up. So Lila, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Your Excellencies, speakers, thank you for convening today's briefing and what is a critical agenda for all of us, and for giving the floor to civil society. We have heard today that measures to control the spread of coronavirus will have unintended consequences for girls' education. Lessons from the Ebola crisis, as outlined by Ambassador Kamaya, show that school closures can lead to increases in gender-based violence, teenage pregnancies, child marriage, exploitation, and other forms of abuse against adolescent girls. School closures will be especially devastating for girls with greater vulnerabilities, such as refugees, internally displaced persons, returnees, and girls with disabilities. Plan International has put in place several measures to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. These include rapid response financing for the education sector at country level, policy recommendations and technical assistance, as well as collating and sharing evidence and good practice. Critically, we are thinking ahead to a time when schools might reopen and are working with partners and governments on considerations to ensure schools are safe and welcoming to children upon their return, and that girls face no barriers to resuming their education. Many of the key interventions and evidence of good practice that we have advocating for and been sharing have been covered on the call today, but I will share 3 critical priorities here. First, to reinforce Mariam's point, we must involve girls and women in the response. We must consult girls and young women during the full cycle of the response, from needs assessments, design of education, and other interventions, to monitoring the effectiveness of the response. This includes any unintended impacts on girls and young women due to school closures. Girls should be involved in decisions about their education. Second, we must ensure adolescent girls and boys continue to have access to comprehensive, age-appropriate sexuality education and sexual and reproductive health and rights information and services as part of distance learning. And thirdly, as the representative from Algeria emphasized, we must encourage girls to re-enroll. This involves removing policies that discriminate against girls, including bans on re-entry for pregnant girls and young mothers, and providing support through flexible and accelerated learning opportunities, as well as catch-up courses. We have a number of other recommendations that I have shared in writing. We'd be happy to circulate further after this. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much indeed, Lila. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the end of our proceedings. I now have the great honor of giving the floor to a really true champion of education, Kieran Cannon, who is also Ireland's Minister for Diaspora and International Development. And Minister, you're going to say a few words to us to wrap up proceedings today. You have the floor, Minister.
Yes, Geraldine, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon for what has been a very fruitful and indeed very inspiring discussion. Joining you here from the west of Ireland, and it's wonderful to see so many participants from all over the world, and I suppose making us perhaps think about the potential of technology to bring us together more often in a more powerful way than we perhaps have been doing in the past. I want to thank each of contributors for their very, very rich involvement in the discussion and for championing the cause of girls' education. My life's journey from being raised in a small rural community similar to Penelope to becoming a minister in education has given me a very deep appreciation of the power of education in unlocking the potential of individuals and the potential of societies. I was part of the first generation to benefit from universal access to free second-level education in Ireland, and an extraordinary transformation has happened in the last 50 years. My son and his friends collectively now have the highest level of third-level attainment in the whole of Europe. So as we in Ireland educated ourselves, our country was transformed economically, transformed socially. Ireland today is simply a much better place to be a woman than the Ireland of my childhood. And that's why when I listened to Executive Director Phumzile, she spoke of the importance of education for adolescent girls as a driving force for gender equality. It echoed my own experience. Barriers to girls' education are also barriers to gender equality. And in the 25th anniversary year of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, let us all commit to building momentum behind adolescent girls' education as the catalyst to delivering on those Beijing commitments. Earlier this year, Ireland, along with our valued partners, the Global Partnership for Education, UN Women, the Malala Fund, and the One Foundation, we launched the call for action for the education of adolescent girls, the Drive for 5. And just 3 months on, that call to action is, one could seriously argue, more urgent today than it ever has been before. And we've heard today evidence from previous public health outbreaks showing that school closures exacerbate existing inequalities, including gender inequalities within education. And this is even more so in low-income settings. And the consequences of COVID-19 for marginalized adolescent girls, they're going to last long beyond these temporary school closures. So we need to tackle barriers to girls' education. That requires all of us to be powerful advocates for change and for new ways of working. But not just advocates, we need to work effectively together to strengthen and equip systemic responses if we are going to achieve that gender equality in and through education. So today's clear commitments and recommendations based on lessons learned and past experience of what works offer important solutions to the unique challenges facing education for adolescent girls worldwide right now. And I want to thank you all again for sharing your insights and your wisdom and your experience. And some of the key messages today we have heard today include the need to ensure continuity of education, to ensure that adolescent girls continue in education. We can design, we can deliver gender-sensitive distance education approaches which respond to their needs and to their circumstances, including the particular challenges faced by vulnerable girls. This will involve technology, but it would also involve communities. We must work with girls, women, families, schools, and communities to build cultures of education within those communities and to maintain the essential services associated with school, including, for example, school feeding, sanitary supplies, and the crucial psychological support. And maintaining supportive social networks for vulnerable girls and integrating life skills and social and emotional learning into that new distance learning provision is absolutely critical. And in terms of returning to school, we need deliberate, we need targeted actions to make sure that the most marginalized girls do return to school after COVID-19. And that again requires the establishment of clear targets and clear timelines for the reopening of schools and engagement with communities in advance before that happens. No policies or practices should be in place that would deter girls from re-enrolling, and flexible learning approaches will help students to catch up on what they have missed, while clever use of social cash transfers and other targeted supports can help reduce the risk and the very serious risk of girls dropping out of school permanently. On building back better, we need to do exactly that. We need to create resilient education systems. We must strengthen monitoring, strengthen evaluation, and the documentation of education responses so that we are learning what does and indeed what doesn't work. And that work again should have a particular focus on the most marginalized and on girls in particular. And this will help us learn lessons in advance of a future epidemic or other crisis that disrupts education. We should also look at how we can leverage the education responses to the virus to build more inclusive and equitable education systems. For example, how might we use distance education tools to enable more flexible access to education and learning for those who are permanently out of school? I think that's a very, very valuable lesson to be learned from the current crisis. I'm conscious too that adolescent girls are often pressurized to prioritize domestic and care duties rather than studying. And again, many countries have made great use of online platforms to continue the connection, to strengthen the connection between teachers and students. So can we expand access to technology, to connectivity, so that disadvantaged students in remote locations can access quality learning and teaching in the future? However, the COVID crisis has also put a spotlight on the digital divide, very much so, both within countries and indeed between countries, and on the gender digital divide. In very many countries, the lack of basic ICT infrastructure, erratic electricity supplies, and low computer ownership are huge limiting factors. So in households where digital resources exist, girls may not have access or sufficient digital skills to gain access to those resources. And that's why other forms of remote learning, including learning by radio, continue to be important and will do so in the future. And as we build for the future, we need to address that digital divide. We need to increase access to digital resources for all children and increase digital literacy. Great initiatives such as Africa Code Week which Irish Aid is very proud to support, or Girls Code Week. They're all excellent ways of introducing digital skills to girls. And these need to be backed up by a scaling up of gender responsive ICT and STEM education in national curricula, and ways must be found to support teachers, because these are the people who can drive this change to take the lead in this innovation. We need to ensure that the voices of adolescent girls are heard at every step of the path to building back education. And as a political champion for education in emergencies and a champion for Generation Unlimited, I was very, very happy to hear from Mariam in Nigeria, who is a Malala Fund youth activist. Thank you, Mariam, for your very, very powerful words. They leave us in no doubt about the impact that school closures are having on the lives of girls right around the world right now. And I was also delighted to hear Mariam speak on how best to support education for adolescent girls in responding to and recovering from COVID-19. Thank you, Mariam. It's vital, absolutely vital, that the voices of girls like you are heard, the voices of today and tomorrow, the voices of a new generation, a generation of equality and for equality. And we've all become very, very familiar, unfortunately, with the term reproductive number in relation to the coronavirus, and with all of our efforts focused on reducing that reproductive number below 1. But girls' education also has a reproductive number, but one that is much more positive, because every girl who receives that quality education and is given the opportunity to reach her full potential has a positive impact on the lives of so many more people. And the global community has made bold and ambitious commitments in the Beijing, did make those bold and ambitious commitments in Beijing 25 years ago, and in the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda again in 2015. So girls' education is the catalyst that can deliver on so many of those global commitments, and particularly for advancing gender equality and women's empowerment, building peace and security, and ultimately achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So in the midst of this global crisis, this global pandemic, and indeed because of it, we need to continue the call to action for the education of adolescent girls. Again, once again, thank you, Geraldine, for organizing this very stimulating and very inspiring conversation. I wish you all, those of you who have been watching in today, every good health and happiness. Keep safe, keep strong, and keep hopeful. Thank you.
Minister, thank you so much indeed. That was really a perfect wrap up to what has been an inspirational morning. Minister, people probably don't know that from where you sit on the west coast of Ireland, if it's a clear day, you can actually see us here in New York. So I hope you can see us all waving and thanking you for those remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to thank everyone individually. We've had an extraordinary moment this morning. Thank you so much indeed. We've been in 8 locations online across 3 continents, and we've had just absolutely one speaker after the next, lifting us up to be absolutely convinced of the virtue of staying focused and shining a light on this extraordinary challenge for girls and education. You can be sure that as the Irish team here in New York work with Liberia, Trinidad and Tobago going forward with our civil society partners, you'll hear more from us. This is a job that is just beginning. Thank you again, Minister, for taking the time. Thank you, President Robinson, Phumzile in South Africa, Alice in Washington, all our friends, Mariam in Nigeria and Youssou in Senegal. We really appreciate you all joining us, and I wish you a safe and healthy rest of today. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Excellent, Geraldine.
Glad you all enjoyed it. Thank you very much. It was great. Thank you all for contributing. I really am very grateful indeed.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much on the other side of that little island.
Not at all,
It's
Geraldine.
time for bed now, Mary. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Very interesting. Very interesting discussion.
Well done. I forgot to say at the end, we will produce an outcome document, and Kamaya will talk about that.
One thing that occurred to me that's worth thinking about is that this COVID-19 crisis has intervened on the crisis we were already discussing, the climate crisis. So we have to build resilience. which means education, health, and broadband access by everybody. In other words, we have a very short window of time before we'll have another looming crisis, which will be, so it kind of, it was there, but not expressly stated. And I think it should be in the final document, yeah.
We'll certainly bring that out, Mary. We can rely on this. And thank you again. Thank you very much.
Well done.
Okay. Great.
Bye.
Thank you again, Minister. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to close the link now.
Okay, thank you very much.